Thebes under a stormy sky. Picture this. The wind was howling through the dusty streets of ancient Thebes. The sky was just gone, swallowed by thick, angry clouds. Not even letting a sliver of light from Khonsu, the moon god, peek through. Standing there, behind the rickety door of a rundown mud brick hut, was a skinny kid. He was watching the rain just hammer down on the sand, carving out these tiny little trenches in the dirt. You know, that moment where you see how life can literally be born from water, but also totally wiped out by it. That kid, his name was Horemheb. Now, he had no idea his name would one day be carved into the towering columns of temples. Nope. Back then, he was just the son of a guy who worked in a nobleman's tomb. Nothing special. Every single night, his dad would spin tales of Egypt's greatest kings. Stories about Thutmose, who trekked across deserts to fight the Hittites. About Amenhotep, who raised Egypt to insane heights. About soldiers who never came home. And how, once upon a time, Egypt truly was the beating heart of the world. But on this particular night, his dad was burning up with a fever. His chest rattled with every single breath, while his mom just kept wiping his forehead with a cool, damp cloth. "My son," his father rasped. "Remember this, the Pharaoh is in Egypt. Egypt is its people." He coughed hard after saying it, his voice trembling. Horemheb just stared into his dad's eyes that held so much determination, even as his body was giving out. Outside, soldiers were marching through the streets of Thebes. You could hear the priests' drums pounding from the temple, and whispers, strange whispers, were spreading about Pharaoh Amenhotep IV. He'd changed his name to Akhenaten, and he was forcing everyone to worship one god, abandoning all the old gods of Thebes. The whole country was in a silent kind of chaos. Markets were empty. People were terrified, scared of the priest's wrath, and equally scared of the pharaoh's, the dream of the falcon god. So, that night, while Horemheb was sleeping next to his dad, who was just, struggling to breathe from that fever, he had this super weird dream. He saw himself standing right by the Nile, the water shimmering like pure gold under a massive, fiery red sun. And then, out of nowhere, a giant falcon just swooped down from the sky and landed right on his shoulder. The falcon looked at him, its eyes piercing, shining with this indescribable light. Then, it spread its wings, and they just covered the entire sky. The desert sands were whipping around in a frenzy, and then the waters of the Nile started to rise. They covered everything. Horemheb saw himself standing there, in the middle of the flood, but he wasn't drowning. He was just standing firm, totally steady, with that falcon still perched on his shoulder. Then, he heard a voice, no idea where it was coming from, saying, "A day will come when you become Egypt's shield and its sword. If you do not bow your head to the storm, you will become the storm." Horemheb woke up with a gasp, totally breathless. He looked at his dad, and his dad was silent. Just silent forever. The fever was gone, but it had taken his father with it. In that very moment, as the bull washed his father's body in the waters of the Nile, he swore an oath. He swore he would never live the life of the weak. He swore that one day, he would be the one to protect Egypt, to stop mothers from crying, and to save children from starving to death. That night was the night Horemheb was truly reborn. First days in the camp. When he finally got to the army camp near El Kab the day was blazing hot, and the sand was burning his feet. He stood in front of the soldier registration officer, a stocky guy in a clean kilt with a neatly trimmed beard. Name, Horemheb Son of whom? Son of Sennacherib What do you want here? I want to join the army. The officer just scoffed, looking at Horemheb's skinny body and arms that had never held a weapon. Then, he motioned for him to stand in a long line of boys and young men just like him. Screams filled the air. Veteran soldiers were shouting and punching the new recruits. Drums were pounding, announcing the start of the day's training, and the sun showed no mercy to anyone. On his very first day, he learned how to hold a spear that was taller than him, how to stand in formation, and how to run while carrying a heavy shield. He fell countless times, his palms and knees scraped raw, but he just kept going. At night, his body ached to the bone, but he'd smile as he looked up at the sky. He felt like he was getting closer to his dream. Meeting a brother in arms. On the third day, while the soldiers were practicing throwing spears, a boy slightly taller than him, with darker skin and a sarcastic grin, walked over. His name was ****. We said ****. Let us just call him ***** for short. Hey, bushy hair. What kind of dirt did you crawl out of? Horemheb, still catching his breath, replied. From Thebes. And you? From Luxor. Came here to learn how to kill Hittites. They both laughed, and from that day on, they were inseparable. It was a blast. He'd tell Horemheb stories of all the cities he'd visited with his dad, who was a merchant. He'd talk about the rivers he'd seen, about priests, and even about robbers who tried to raid caravans. They used to tell him, "If I die in battle, steal my sword and keep going," and Horemheb would shoot back, "You won't die until you get a beautiful wife from Thebes." They had an unwritten pact to always have each other's backs in any fight. The first scent of blood. After a month of brutal training, the day came when they were finally sent out for a small skirmish against Bedouin tribes who had attacked Egypt's southern borders. Night had just begun to spread its cool chill when the herald came, pounding his drums. "Get ready. The army marches at dawn." Horemheb didn't sleep that night. He gripped his spear, feeling a cold sweat on his neck. He was scared, but he definitely didn't want to admit it. In the morning, the army marched out in perfect formation. Soldiers carried spears and bows, shields clanged together. And the sound of horse hooves shook the ground. His heart pounded wildly. And he kept repeating to himself, "I'm not scared. One day, I'll be the leader of this army." They reached the border, where the sand stretched endlessly, and there, for the very first time, he saw men screaming as they ran towards them. Spears raised, arrows flying through the air. The battle erupted, blood splattered everywhere, screams filled their ears. Dust coated their eyes, the sounds mixed together until he couldn't tell the enemy's cries from his friends. He saw a man fall next to him, blood gushing from his neck, and then he heard Ka yell, "Watch out, behind you." He spun around quickly, seeing a man raising a sword at him. In a flash of pure instinct, he thrust his spear into the man's stomach. He felt the man's body tremble. And then he collapsed to the ground. Horemheb just stared at the man he had killed, his hands shaking, his eyes full of sand and tears. This was the first man he had ever taken alive. After the battle finally ended after hours. The sand was stained with dark blood, and a vulture circled high above, as if scouting for a landing spot. Horemheb sat on the ground, his hands still gripping his spear. His body was trembling, but deep inside, something new had ignited, something like fire. Ka came over, sat next to him, put a hand on his shoulder, and said, "You're a real soldier now." Horemheb looked up at the sky. The sun was setting, painting the sand crimson. He felt like this moment was the start of his journey, a path that would lead him to a destiny he didn't yet know. Chapter 7. Marching to Nubia. A few days passed after his first taste of blood and death. At night, soldiers would gather around the fire, boasting about their bravery, each exaggerating their blows and the number of enemies they'd killed. But Horemheb, he was silent. The face of the man he'd stabbed still haunted him, creeping into his dreams. He'd see him, bleeding, his eyes pleading for mercy. In the morning, the herald arrived, orders from the high commander. Expedition to Nubia. Egypt's southern borders were always a hot zone. Kushite tribes were constantly on the move, attacking, and the army had to protect the gold mines, which were the lifeblood of the pharaoh's treasury. Soldiers gathered at sunrise. The Nile glittered, and military barges waited, their white sails catching the cool wind. Horemheb and their friends boarded. They were waving goodbye to the east bank of Thebes, a mix of fear and excitement in their hearts. They had no idea this campaign would change their destinies forever. Chapter 8. Deep in the golden desert the journey stretched on, first along the Nile, then through scorching deserts. The sand burned their feet by day and chilled them to the bone at night. The soldiers carried water in leather bags and dates in small pouches, sharing food and stories under the stars. One night, Horemheb sat gazing at the sky and said to Ka, "See all these stars? All those kings died and went to the sky. But who cares about those who died here on earth?" Ka playfully punched his arm. "If you want the sky to care about you, get your name carved on stone. On temples, on palaces." Horemheb laughed, but he never forgot those words. Chapter 9. The First Great Battle. Tongues of flame. The army finally reached a village near the gold mines. Smoke was rising from the huts. The Nubians had attacked, killed the guards, stolen the gold, and left blood on the doors. The great commander arrived, a tall man wearing a golden helmet shaped like a falcon's head. His name was Commander Bakhemmet. His voice was deep. "We won't return until we've reclaimed the gold and Egypt's honor." The army set off before dawn. The sand was cold, and the sounds of their footsteps mingled with the rapid breaths of the soldiers. For the first time, Horemheb saw the Nubian archers, fast as the wind, their weapons precise, releasing arrows quickly before anyone could even spot them. In the battle, Horemheb fought beside Ka, hiding behind his shield, striking with spears, catching enemy arrows and throwing them back. In one moment, he saw Commander Bakhemmet fall from his horse, an arrow in his thigh. A Nubian was about to pounce on him. Horemheb ran, not even thinking. He struck the Nubian with his spear, taking him down. Then, he raised his shield over the commander's head, protecting him from the arrows. The commander looked at him with eyes that appreciated courage. He asked, "Your name, soldier?" "Horemheb, sir." The commander, his voice laced with pain, said, "Today, you saved the sword of Egypt." Chapter 10. After the dust. A name emerges after the battle. The forces temporarily returned to camp. They carried with them the reclaimed gold, the prisoners, and an unseen wound in their souls. That night, Commander Bakhemmet called Horemheb to his tent. The commander sat on a large cushion, his leg wrapped in bandages. On the table before him, a goblet of red wine gleamed under the oil lamps. "Come, Horemheb, sit." The young man knelt. His head bowed. He wasn't scared. Instead, he felt something new. Recognition. "Tell me, who taught you courage?" "Injustice, sir." The commander let out a deep laugh, then fell silent, staring at his face for a long time. "A day will come when Egypt will need someone who isn't afraid of arrows to save it." That night, Horemheb walked out of the tent, the moon slowly rising over the dunes. He felt his heart was different. He felt that this land was now his responsibility, that the sand, the gold, the Nile, and the blood all had become part of his path. Chapter 11. Return to Thebes and the court meeting. Weeks later, the army returned to Thebes, laden with spoils and prisoners. The drums of return were pounding, and the city's people came out to see the soldiers. Women threw flowers, and children ran behind the chariots carrying reclaimed gold, textiles, and statues. In that moment, Horemheb saw his mother standing at the edge of the road. She looked older than he remembered, her face weathered by the wind, her tears mixing with her smile. "Mother, my son, you've returned." There weren't many words, just a long embrace. Long enough to erase the fear of the long nights by the Nile. Entering the palace on the day of the victory celebration, the army's leaders were summoned to the palace of the young king, Tutankhamun. He was still just a boy, really. With the priests and generals truly pulling the strings behind the scenes, the palace itself was breathtaking. Towering columns, walls adorned with gold and alabaster, the rich scent of incense hanging in the air, and statues of the gods guarding every doorway. Horemheb entered with Commander Bakhemmet, who by now saw him as the son he never had. In the great hall, the young king sat on his throne, his face serene, his eyes a little lost. Around him were a gathering of priests and nobles. Among them, one man caught Horemheb's eye, a thin man in a black robe, holding a long staff. His gaze was cold, as if he could see right through you. This was the chief advisor to the court. The first spark of ambition. Commander Bakhemmet stepped forward and declared, my lord. The army has returned victorious. And I wish to bring to your attention this soldier, who saved my life on the battlefield." The king's eyes lifted to Horemheb. He looked at him, and offered that weak smile of his. "Thank you. Egypt needs more like you." The words weren't many, but they were enough. In that moment, Horemheb felt something ignite in his chest. It wasn't just pride, it was ambition. He saw the priests whispering amongst themselves. He saw advisory's sly smile. And he looked at that golden throne, and how small the boy on it seemed compared to the sheer might of Egypt. He walked out of the hall as the sun set behind the pyramids, whispering to himself, a day will come when I will be the one who protects this throne, or sits upon it. Dawn on the sands. Months had passed since he stood before the golden throne in the palace hall, months, most of which he spent in rigorous training near the northern forts on the edge of the delta, where the cool Mediterranean winds met the desert heat, creating a mix of humidity and dust. Every day, the sun would rise, a fiery red, as if it was washing the land with blood before letting it dry under its fierce glare. In those mornings, Horemheb would rise before everyone else. He'd grab his spear and head to the edge of the desert, practicing thrusts and throws, watching his long shadow cross the sand as if imagining an enemy standing before him. Who was still with him. He'd become more a brother than a friend. They trained together, planned together, and dreamed together. One night, as they sat by a small fire, he said, "Hey, Horemheb, we're not just soldiers anymore. You know that." "Right." Horemheb looked at him with his calm eyes. "I know, but the path is long. First, assignment as an officer." One day, a messenger arrived from the high commander, carrying an order sealed with the golden falcon's emblem. Everyone stood in the sandy square as the commander read the orders. Horemheb is appointed platoon commander, tasked with leading 50 soldiers to guard the gold caravan arriving from the southern mines. The soldiers couldn't believe their eyes. The poor kid from Thebes was now a commander, but Horemheb didn't smile. Instead, he bowed silently, took the orders, and returned to his tent. There, he prayed before a small statue of the god Horus that he'd inherited from his father, thanking the falcon god he'd once dreamed of as a child, the gold caravan and fire. The caravan moved slowly across the desert. Camels were laden with heavy chests, and around them, soldiers marched in tight formations, their eyes constantly scanning the horizon. Horemheb rode a small black horse, occasionally looking up at the sky, feeling the desert wind on his face, and thinking about what could happen if robbers attacked. That night, while they rested, he overheard whispers among the soldiers. "I heard the robbers teamed up with some of our own soldiers. Someone wants to steal the gold." He didn't know who started the rumor, but his gut told him that betrayal might be closer than he imagined. First confrontation with betrayal. On the fourth night, with the moon high in the sky, he heard faint footsteps among the camels. He slowly crept out of his tent. He saw 3 soldiers trying to open the gold chests, whispering to each other. He raised his spear and yelled, "Hold it right there." The soldiers turned, their faces filled with fear and anger. One of them lunged at him with a knife. Horemheb swiftly dodged the blow, stabbed him in the shoulder, and took him down, while the other 2 fled into the desert. He ordered the rest of his men to light fires and fire signal arrows. They chased the traitors until they caught them near the dunes, bringing them back bound. In the morning, Horemheb ordered their trial in front of everyone. Whoever betrays Egypt, betrays his mother, his land, and his gods. The sentence was carried out. The traitors were executed in front of the soldiers, making his message clear. The army means loyalty, or it means death. The proud returned eyes begin to turn. The caravan returned to Thebes without losing a single chest. Commander Bakhemut greeted him with a huge smile. "Excellent work, Horemheb. This is exactly what we need in the army." His name started echoing among the commanders and priests. They'd say, "There's a brave young man there, who shows no mercy to traitors, and has no greed for gold. His heart belongs to Egypt." Even the priests in the temples of Ammon heard about him, as the gold he returned filled the temple coffers, bringing life back to statues and festivals. On the brink of a great war, the Hittites are coming. The news from the north was unsettling. The Hittites in Anatolia were expanding their influence, attacking cities allied with Egypt, threatening its merchants, and imposing tributes on caravans. The commanders gathered in a large hall in the army camp. Maps were spread out, marked with red lines showing the Hittite invasions. Commander Bakhemut stood up and said, "We need leaders who aren't afraid of war. We need men who will protect Egypt's borders." Then he looked at Horemheb. "You will be on the front lines." A prayer before war. Before dawn, Horemheb went to a small temple near the banks of the Nile, where statues of the gods stood with silent faces, and lit candles cast shadows on the stone walls. He stood before a statue of Horus, raising his hand. "O falcon god, just as you carried me on your wings when I was a child, carry me today to victory, or to an honorable death." He knew this wasn't just another war, it was a test of his strength, his courage, and his readiness to bear the burden of the country on his shoulders. On the battlefield, in the north, where green land met dusty hills, the Egyptian army stood beneath the golden falcon banners. Soldiers pounded drums, archers prepared, and cavalry waited for orders. Horemheb saw the enemy for the first time, rows of Hittites, with their heavy shields, long spears, and shouts that shook the desert. The wind carried the scent of blood even before the battle began. When the command was given, the lines charged. Spears clashed, arrows filled the sky, and cries of pain mixed with the roars of war. Horemheb fought like a madman, fighting with the sword he'd taken from a Nubian thief he'd killed one day, yelling, "For Egypt!" He saw Ka fall to the ground, an arrow in his leg. Horemheb ran to him and dragged him behind the defensive line, fighting with one hand. In the heart of the battle, he felt like he had become part of the sand, the blood, the screams, a piece of Egypt fighting to stay alive. Victory and the birth of a legend. Hours later, as the sun set, the field was silent except for the groans of the wounded and the ravens beginning to circle overhead. The Egyptians had won. They pushed the Hittites far back and reclaimed their allied cities. Horemheb stood on the field, his body covered in dust and blood. His eyes searched for Ka, until he found him sitting on a rock, laughing despite his wound. "Hey Horemheb, I'm not dead yet." Horemheb smiled for the first time in days. He raised his sword to the sky and watched the sunset paint the horizon red like blood. First meeting with the high priests. The army returned to Thebes in triumph. Prayers rose in the temples, incense filled the air, and drums pounded for the gods. In the temple of Ammon, Horemheb was summoned to meet with the high priest, Mentuhotep, a large man with a long beard and piercing eyes. The priest told him, "Horemheb, Egypt needs men who maintain order. The priests need someone to protect the temples, and Egypt needs someone to wield the sword for her." Horemheb replied, "I am a soldier for Egypt, nothing more." The priest smiled. "You will be more than a soldier soon. There are days coming when Egypt will need men like you. When kings grow weary, the sword becomes king." Horemheb left the temple, his heart pounding. He felt that these words weren't just words, they were a prophecy, the beginning of building loyalty. In the following days, Horemheb began to show his fairness within the army. He helped poor soldiers, shared his food with them, and stood with the weak against the cruelty of some unjust officers. His name began to be spoken with respect in the camps. "That's Horemheb, the man who leaves no one behind." The soldiers began to love him, to trust him, seeing him as a true leader. And he realized that these men were his strength for the day he would need someone to stand with him. The seed of a dream from soldier to Egypt's savior. One night, as he sat by the Nile contemplating the moonlight on the water, Ka came and sat beside him in long silence. Ka said, "You know, Horemheb, sometimes I feel like this whole country is waiting for you." Horemheb looked at him, a sad smile on his face. "A country like Egypt doesn't wait for anyone, Ka, but it needs someone who isn't afraid to die for it." Then he turned to the Nile. "If the day comes when I need to bear this burden, I won't run." That night, Egypt began to feel that a man named Horemheb would become something greater than just a soldier, greater than just a commander. Rising through the ranks, years passed since Horemheb's return from the war with the Hittites. During those years, his name echoed in every camp, within palace corridors, in temples, and in the markets, where people would whisper his name as soldiers in their red and black uniforms passed by. Horemheb was still young, but he already carried the burden of hundreds of soldiers on his shoulders. He led them in morning drills, on nighttime punitive campaigns against bandits, and in arranging garrisons along the desert borders with Bedouin tribes. One morning, a messenger from the royal court arrived at the army camp in Thebes. Carrying a papyrus scroll sealed with the golden falcon's emblem, the commander read the orders aloud to the assembled soldiers. By decree of His Majesty King Tutankhamun, and with the counsel of priests, Horemheb is appointed commander-in-chief of the armies of Egypt. Silence fell. This position wasn't just given to anyone, it was reserved for those who had proven themselves on the battlefield, earned the trust of the priests and the court, and whom the soldiers saw as their refuge in times of fear. Horemheb raised his head to the sky. He remembered his father in that humble hut in Thebes, and his mother who died without seeing his day of glory. Anka, who now stood beside him, clapping him on the shoulder and whispering, "It's begun, my friend." The ailing pharaoh, and terror in the palace Tutankhamun was still only 19 years old, ruling Egypt, or so it appeared to the people. But the real power was in the hands of the priests, led by the shrewd old advisory, and the temple officials. On many nights, the palace corridors were filled with whispers. Guards would change their positions nervously, and priests would enter the king's chambers late at night, carrying medicines and incense. Word reached Horemheb that the king was gravely ill, and the court physicians couldn't cure him. Egypt, in those days, was filled with dread. Farmers in the fields whispered, "If the pharaoh dies, who will rule?" And in the temples, the priests redoubled their prayers, offered sacrifices, burned incense, raising their voices into the night. "Go Amen, protect the king, protect Egypt." But the illness was stronger than their prayers. The last night of the young king, one night, Horemheb was summoned to the palace. Soldiers stood in the hallways with pale faces, and shadows stretched long on the oil lamplit walls. He entered the room where the king lay. He looked so small on the grand bed, his bones protruding, his eyes half open, his lips moving with a faint whisper. Horemheb approached, knelt, held the king's frail hand, and said softly, "I am here, my lord." Tutankhamun slowly opened his eyes and murmured, "Horemheb, protect Egypt. Don't let them plunder it." The king's eyes closed. In that moment, Horemheb felt the room grow cold, as if a spirit had departed, as if a final breath had been taken, as if Egypt itself had fallen silent to listen to the sound of death. The struggle for power. When news of the king's death spread, Egypt trembled. Priests gathered in secret at night, generals met in their camps, and people in the streets asked, "Who will rule now?" The old advisor, emerged, declaring himself regent of the throne. He announced, "I will rule until the gods find someone to sit on the throne." But in secret, the high nobles were furious, muttering, "An old man trying to steal the throne." As for the priests, they feared losing their authority if a man who didn't fear them, a man like Horemheb, took the throne. A meeting in the shadows. One night, as the moon reflected on the waters of the Nile, a clandestine messenger arrived at Horemheb's camp. "High Priest Mentuhotep wishes to meet you in secret." Horemheb went to the temple of Ammon under the cover of darkness. He walked through the long stone corridors, smelling the incense and the blood from sacrifices, hearing the faint chants of the priests. In a small chamber, High Priest Mentuhotep sat. He told him, "Egypt is on the verge of being lost, Horemheb." Horemheb replied, "And what do you want from me, priest of Ammon?" The priest looked at him for a long time. "The throne needs a strong man, a man who knows war and peace, who knows the people and the temples." Horemheb didn't reply, but his heart pounded fiercely, building a network of loyalty. Horemheb returned to his camp and summoned his junior commanders. He sat with them around a fire late into the night. "If Egypt is lost, there will be no bread for your children, no water in the Nile," he told them. "We are the army. We are the ones who protect Egypt." Nights in the camps became nights of whispers. Soldiers talked about the fearless commander, about the man who might one day become pharaoh. The first plan for the throne Horemheb sat by the Nile, beside him. Stars reflected on the water's surface, and the wind gently stirred the river. Ka said, "You know, Horemheb, if you asked the army to proclaim you pharaoh tomorrow, they would." Horemheb replied in a low voice, "Not yet. Egypt is scared now. It needs someone to reassure it, not to shake it up." He looked at the temple visible on the horizon. "If you want to become pharaoh, you have to win over the priests first." And so began his first real plan: win over the priests by protecting the temples. Calm the people by ensuring bread and water. Secure the army to be his sword when needed. Watch advisory without direct confrontation. Tears on the tomb. When Tutankhamun was buried in the Valley of the Kings, chants filled the air. Priests recited prayers, soldiers carried golden statues, and censers poured out thick smoke. Horemheb stood before the tomb, placing his hand on the golden sarcophagus. "Farewell, King of Egypt. I promise to protect her, and I will." A single tear rolled down his cheek. He wiped it away quickly, then turned to leave, beginning a long road towards the throne. The calm before the storm. After the king's burial, Thebes returned to a heavy silence. Markets were open, people planted and harvested. Temples held prayers, but in their hearts, everyone waited. The priests plotted, the nobles watched, the army prepared. As for Horemheb, he smiled quietly as he stood on the balcony of his headquarters, watching the Nile flow calmly, knowing that this tranquility was merely the prelude to the coming storm. In that moment, in the dead of night, he whispered to himself, "My day is coming, Egypt. Your day is coming." When he took the throne after Tutankhamun's burial, Egypt plunged into 3 days of silence and mourning. Markets closed, drums went quiet. Even the Nile seemed to flow slowly out of respect for the departed king. Then, on the 4th day, the old advisor, emerged from his palace wing. He was wearing royal robes and the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. He stood before the priests, generals, and nobles and declared, "The gods have chosen, and I shall be the ruler of Egypt until the gods preserve the throne." There was no applause, no cheers, just silence, a heavy silence. Like the silence of tombs, the kind of silence that comes right before a storm, the silent rage in Horemheb's eyes. When the news reached him, Horemheb was standing on the bank of the Nile, watching the sunset. Became pharaoh. Ka replied, "Yes," he declared himself today, and the priests blessed him. Horemheb didn't answer. He just kept looking at the horizon where the sun was melting into the Nile's waters, then said quietly, "Egypt won't stay forever under the hand of a sick, old man." Testing the army's pulse, Horemheb returned to his camp that night. He called his senior officers, one by one. He sat with them by the fire, shared bread and water, and then said, "Egypt needs a strong leader, a man who knows the sword, who knows justice." He looked into their eyes, one by one, watching their fear, their hesitation, and their hidden faith in him. One of them replied, "We are with you, Horemheb, but the people fear change." Horemheb gave a small smile. "When the people see security, they will know whom to rally behind." Secret messages from the temples. Days later, High Priest Mentuhotep sent a secret message to Horemheb. It was a small papyrus scroll that read, "Come tonight, alone." He went to the temple of Ammon, walking through the dark corridors. Smoke filled the air, and distant chants echoed off the high ceiling. He found the priest standing before the massive statue of Ammon. He thinks he sees the throne, but he won't live long. Horemheb replied, "And Egypt? Egypt needs someone to rule it with an iron fist, but with a heart that doesn't forget its people." Horemheb nodded, "I understand."
The first secret coup attempt. Weeks later, rumors began to spread. Someone is planning to overthrow A. These rumors were true. The night saw secret meetings between army officers and some priests who were furious about A's heavy taxes. But A was cunning. His spies in the markets and taverns heard the whispers. And on one dark night, his soldiers raided the homes of junior commanders he suspected, arresting them before any move could be made. In the morning, 3 of them were publicly executed in the square near the temples. The blood that watered the path. Horemheb watched the executions. He didn't flinch. He knew this blood would be the beginning, not the end. That night, he sat in his tent. In front of him, silence filled the space. Said, "Maybe we should wait." Horemheb. "People are scared," Horemheb replied, staring into the flickering oil lamp. "Fear is what lengthens the lives of tyrants. But fear doesn't last forever." Getting closer to the people, Horemheb realized that the priests alone weren't enough, and the army alone wasn't enough. He needed the people. In the mornings, he would go into the markets. He'd stand with the people, listen to their complaints, see the old leaning on their staffs, see mothers selling bread with trembling hands. He'd buy from them, paying more than it was worth. He'd call children by their names, pat their heads, and smile. People began to whisper, "Did you see? Horemheb isn't afraid to walk among us." A's image begins to crumble as months passed. A grew older and weaker. His voice trembled, and he'd cough in front of his advisors. Doctors would enter his room at night with their herbs and perfumes. In the palace, soldiers began to whisper, "The pharaoh can't stand for long." In the markets, who's really ruling? And in the temples, perhaps it's time for Egypt to find a new hand. A final secret meeting with High Priest Mentuhotep. One night, Horemheb entered the temple through a back door. He found the priests standing before the sacred fire. "The time has come, Horemheb," Horemheb replied. "How?" "The people are still afraid," the priest said. "People only need a spark." The grand plan. Horemheb returned to his camp and gathered his officers. He told them, "Tomorrow we declare the army's protection of Egypt. We declare the protection of the people. We declare our loyalty to the gods. And we declare an end to tyranny." The soldiers raised their hands and declared, "With you, Horemheb." The death of A before their plan could even begin. The news arrived. A died tonight. No one knew how he died. Some said he fell ill. Some said he died in his sleep. Some said his hand went limp as he was writing something on a papyrus. His head fell to the table, and the crown rolled from his head. In the morning, chaos erupted in the palace. Nobles were scared, priests were confused, soldiers were silent. Egypt waits. Horemheb walked out onto the balcony of his headquarters. He stood before the soldiers, and people gathered in the square. Egypt needs a leader. One who will protect the land, the water, and the people. Hands shot up into the air. Horemheb. Horemheb. Horemheb, the moment that changed everything. In that moment, Horemheb realized that his old dream, the dream of the poor child who used to look at the Nile, had become a reality. It wasn't a victory, it was a beginning. The oath before the gods in the temple of Amun, Horemheb stood wearing the royal white robes. Priests raised prayers, incense filled the air, and soldiers packed the corridors. He raised his hands before the statue of Amun and declared, "I swear to protect Egypt, to be justice in this land, and to bear this crown with honor." Then he bowed, turned, and walked out to meet his people as Pharaoh of Egypt.
First day as Pharaoh. When he returned to the palace in Thebes after his coronation, dawn was just about to break. The Nile breeze drifted through the wide windows, carrying the scent of water mixed with the earthy smell of the mud brick. Horemheb stood before the polished copper mirror, wearing the double crown. He touched the heavy edges of the crown, feeling a weight he'd never felt before. It wasn't like a sword or a spear. It was a weight carrying the pain of thousands of farmers, the hopes of soldiers, the prayers of priests, and the dreams of children. Ka entered the room, smiling despite his tired eyes. "My friend, the crown suits you now." Horemheb replied, "The crown suits no one, Ka. The crown is a burden, not an adornment." Last morning prayer as an ordinary man. Before sunrise, he went to a small temple near the river. He bowed before the statue of Horus, the falcon god. "You were with me when I was a soldier. Be with me now as I bear this burden." He knew Egypt was now his, but not to rule as he pleased. It was his to protect as he must. First council meeting the next day, the senior commanders, nobles, and priests gathered in the Hall of Columns. Towering columns reached the high ceiling, and shadows cloaked the faces of those present. Horemheb stood at the front and spoke in a clear voice. Egypt needs order, justice, and a sword to protect it. He looked into their eyes today. We begin a new chapter. Whoever steals from the people will be held accountable. Whoever oppresses the weak will be punished. And whoever stands with Egypt will find me by their side. Eradicating corruption, he sent his soldiers to the tax collection centers. He ordered the fair registration of lands and taxes. He stopped the petty theft by minor officials and punished corrupt authorities. He personally visited the granaries where wheat was secretly hoarded for illicit sale. He ordered the doors open and food distributed to the hungry, declaring, "No child in Egypt shall go hungry as long as the Nile flows." Reforming the army, he knew the army was Egypt's shield and sword. So he began training the soldiers with strict discipline. He abolished ranks bought with money, appointing commanders based on their competence, not their wealth. He would make sudden visits to the camps, observe drills, eat with the soldiers, and share water with them under the scorching sun. The army began to chant his name, Horemheb, Horemheb. The Northern War. Deterring the Hittites, news arrived that the Hittites were attacking Egypt's northern borders again, testing the new pharaoh's resolve. Horemheb stood before a map of Egypt, pointing his finger north. "I will go myself." He assembled a large army and marched at their head, crossing the desert until they reached the northern borders, where cities were complaining of raids. A day of blood and sand. On the third morning after his arrival, he saw plumes of smoke on the horizon. He knew the Hittites were attacking a small town near the border. He ordered his soldiers to prepare. In the morning dust, the army charged, their shouts filling the desert, for Egypt. He saw the enemy before him, men with black shields, long swords, and the rising sound of their drums. He led the charge himself, at the very front, his sword gleaming under the sun. He struck, pushed, and roared, "Whoever touches the land of Egypt will die." Victory and reclamation. After hours of blood and sand, the Hittites retreated, leaving their dead behind. Horemheb liberated the city. He entered the city on his black horse. People poured out of their homes, throwing flowers under the feet of his soldiers. Children cried out, "Pharaoh, Pharaoh." Horemheb paused, raised his sword to the sky. "No foreigner will touch this land as long as I live." Return to Thebes. And Egypt breathes. He returned to Thebes victorious. Crowds greeted him on the banks of the Nile. Women ululated, men raised their hands, and priests scattered incense. He stood on a stone platform before the people. "This victory is not mine, but yours. You are what made Egypt great. You are what makes the blood that flows in my veins worthwhile." The great reforms. He returned to ruling with an iron will. He began justly registering lands, redistributing some lands owned by priests who had abused their influence, but wisely, so as not to antagonize all the temples. He established a new judicial system, appointed honest judges, and ordered the courts open to the poor without fear. He issued decrees to reform the irrigation systems to ensure fair water distribution to farmers. The people feel justice. Farmers began to raise their heads in the fields. Merchants felt safe in the markets. Children slept at night without fear of hunger. People began to say, "Justice has returned to Egypt." The Nubian campaign to secure the south. He learned that some tribes in Nubia were threatening merchants on the southern borders. He prepared a punitive campaign and inscribed on tablets, "Egypt does not forget its land." He led the army himself southwards, crossing the deserts. Reaching the Nubian borders, he sent messengers to the tribal chiefs, either peace under the justice of Egypt, or the sword. The tribes chose peace, offering obedience, gold, and soldiers. Last meeting with Ka, he returned to Thebes, sitting by the Nile at night. Ka beside him, gazing at the stars. Ka said, "You've done what no one else has, Horemheb." Horemheb replied with a smile, "No one does anything alone, Ka. This land helped me." He paused for a moment, "But the most important thing is that Egypt remains after me." The last will. When he felt his body weakening after years of rule, he summoned the priests, ministers, and generals. He told them, "Do not make this crown your goal. Instead, make Egypt your goal. The land is more precious than gold. The people are more precious than the sword. And justice is heavier than the crown. The final sunset on a quiet evening, he sat by the window, watching the Nile flow. He remembered his father and mother, his childhood in the streets of Thebes, the first sword he held, and his oath before Horus. He closed his eyes and said, "I have done what I could. O Egypt, I entrust you to the gods." Egypt does not die after his death. Soldiers wept, farmers wept, and priests offered prayers. His funeral procession passed among the people who stood on the banks of the Nile, waving flowers to him, but he never died in the hearts of the people. He left behind justice, a strong army, and the memory of a leader who never forgot he was once a poor child, and that Egypt is greater than any crown.